just going to take this off. Does that work? Can folks hear me? How's everyone doing this morning? It's always a little tough to be the keynote speaker the morning after the first night of a progressive convention. Be nice to know that works on both sides of the river, so to speak, and it can be difficult. So I'm going to be as animated as I can, move my arms, keep folks interested, and then as your caffeine kicks in, hopefully the panel will be incredibly informative for everybody. There's a couple things I want to talk about before we get started into the actual presentation. The first is some of this will be applicable to you, and frankly, some of this will not. What I'm going to be walking through is the 2008 campaign and some of the rationale behind the decisions that were made, 2009 and 2010, how we set goals as an organization and why that's important, and then how did we build an organization to achieve those goals. Obviously, get out the vote in America is a pretty big deal. I would be unemployed if I lived in Australia because folks here vote. But I hope that some of the tactics that we use for Get Out the Vote start either a brainstorming or a discussion about how can we apply those tactics for persuasion. And a lot of what we did in 2008, in addition to registering voters and turning folks out, was a massive, massive persuasion program that we were able to quantify changed minds and increased likelihood of supporting then Senator Obama by 5 to 8 points, depending on how we were contacting those folks. I do want to apologize also. While it's spring in Chicago, apparently it is not here. So that too is not applicable. The second thing is I'm not a trained public speaker. In fact, I have sort of ADD, both verbally and non-verbally, and have a tendency to have to walk around. So I hope you bear with me. But one of the things that I do on a regular basis frequently is train. And I hope as we go through the PowerPoint, the presentation, that everyone writes down questions so that we can get through it. I won't be able to go through everything that I'd want to, and I'll probably forget some things that I really want to stress. So I hope the conversation we have after this allows us to dig in a little bit deeper on some of the issues that you all care about. And then finally, I love non sequiturs. So everyone's in grave, grave danger that 15 minutes into this presentation, we're going to start talking about Australian football. And because I was up at 3:30 this morning due to the time difference, I watched a lot of it, and I have a lot of questions. But I'm hopeful we can save that. What's that? I know. See, there's a whole conversation that we should be having, and I apologize. This is my fault. This is my fault. So to get started, one of the things that you do as an organizer is you tell your story of self. It's one of the ways, one of the best ways to establish a relationship with somebody else. You tell that individual how I got involved in this and why. And then the hope is they'll tell you, right? Is everyone here familiar with your elevator pitch? If you can't tell your story in 60 seconds, you don't have a story. If you're stuck in an elevator with someone, you know, how can you start a conversation, a relationship with that person? Are you familiar with that? Anyone? Good. So I have a elevator story. It's both literal and figurative, and why it's important. I got started in politics in 1999. I did my first campaign in 2002, and then met then Senator Barack Obama in 2006. I was in Minnesota. I was a coordinated campaign director. I saw a Golden Gophers T-shirt. Gentleman looking down right there, Minnesota. Good for you. And was a coordinated campaign director, which basically meant I was in charge of all the field for a Senate race, also a governor's race, and a couple others. But in 2004, I was the field director for Tom Daschle, who was the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. I'm from South Dakota. It's a very, very small state. Geographically, it's large, but there's not very many people there. And in 2004, for the first time in 50 years, we lost a sitting leader in the Senate in a race that we have about 400,000 registered voters in South Dakota, and $40 million was spent. It was one of the nastiest, toughest races, and it's something that I think about weekly, if not daily. It's a race that I continue to think about because he was such a good man, and He didn't deserve to lose. But a lot of folks that worked for Senator Daschle then ended up working for then Senator Obama. And I was in Minnesota and was told that he was going to come and do our Humphrey Day dinner, which was a big, big fundraiser for the state party in Minnesota, and that I was going to get to staff him. I was very excited. You know, I've seen the convention, right? Everyone saw that speech. Not a red America, there's not blue, you know, that was great stuff. Audacity for hope, you know, I was very, very excited. So I showed up late, and scrambling. It was at the Grand Hyatt, I think, in downtown Minneapolis. I had to buy a belt at the hotel lobby, but it was a big person's belt. So I took my keys and we're jamming a hole, trying to find making a hole into the leather so that I can put it on. Sprinted up to the elevator, sprinted up to like the 37th floor, wherever he was staying. And he came in, and I was super nervous, super excited, and thought this was my moment, right? I was going to make a great impression on him, and we were going to be lifelong friends. You know, all the things that you say when you meet a public servant that you respect and admire. So we get in there, and you have like Celine Dion playing the music in an elevator, you know, horribly awkward. It's him on one side, me on the other. So I just went for it. I said, well, Senator, you know, it's a pleasure. We really appreciate you being here. I'm friends with a lot of folks that work in your office. He goes, well, great, that's great, Mitch. And then just nothing. So we're like on floor 32 at this point, and it's just awkward silence going down, and you know, I'm feeling bad about myself, feeling sort of sorry for myself, had my head down, and you know, about floor 18, he says, say Mitch. And it popped up, it's like, this is my second opportunity here, I'm gonna do better. He goes, you say, you happen to see what I'm wearing? And you know, I hadn't really up to that point, but I looked and I said, well, yes, sir, now that you mention it, I do recognize what you're wearing. He's like, I'm wearing gray suit pants and a black suit top because I had to get dressed at 4 in the morning, and I didn't want to turn on the lights to wake up Michelle, so I dressed in the dark, and this is what happened. So, right, that's kind of a fun story, and obviously he was, you know, kind of throwing me a bone because I just blew up, you know, 30 seconds earlier. But what happened then is, so I was late getting to the hotel, I just told you that, right? So I had 2 different pairs of socks on. So literally, as he was kind of going through like his own personal issues as far as being completely mismatched, I'm yanking my leg up, showing him my socks, and saying, sir, I know I have different pairs of socks on. I feel your pain, you know. So he goes, well, Mitch, are you giving a speech in front of 3,000 people? And I said, no, sir, I'm not. So while that's a great self-deprecating story, right? Yeah. But this is why it's important, at least for me personally, and this is why I got involved. So we went to the ballroom, literally 3,000 people. And Minnesota is not a very diverse state. Minneapolis is a relatively diverse city, but Minnesota itself is not a very diverse state. So literally there's 3,000 faces. You know, probably 98% of those faces are white. He gets in and he's mobbed, just mobbed. And literally you're pushing people away, trying to get him to the stage. And as we're walking up there, he's tired, right? He just told me that he got up at 4 in the morning, so he's had a long day. And he's like, Mitch, is there any way that we can get out of here and not go through these 3,000 people again? And I said, sir, you know, I don't think there is, but I was really ready to impress him here. I'm like, I'm ready to block anybody we need to. Like, I will create a path for you. So he kind of said, okay, you know, but you could tell he was disappointed. He gave a speech, and people were crying. People were crying. And I'm a pretty cynical person, or at least I was at that point. And, you know, it was moving, right? It was moving. But when he finished, you know, people erupted, right? Just erupted. He looked at me and sort of sighed deeply because he knew he was going to have to go through this. And a security guard, an African immigrant security guard, ran up and said, sir, I can get you out quicker. And then Senator Obama looked at me. I kind of shrugged, and then looked at the 3,000 people. He said, yes, let's go. So we literally went through the bowels of this Grand Hyatt in downtown Minneapolis. And, you know, these are the folks who were serving the dinner. There was a big laundry room, you know, where folks were doing the towels and the sheets, a big kitchen. And literally, folks who had never, ever participated in politics, I swear by it. Folks who, you know, if there is a segment of the population in America who've been left behind, this was it. And they literally lined the corridor and gave him a standing ovation as we left. So, you know, in my mind, you have 3,000 people, relatively affluent, but crying tears, right? And then you have communities of color lining this hallway in the middle of this downtown hotel in Minneapolis, clapping as he walked out. And I said, my goodness, if there's a person who can move these two different constituencies, so to speak, you know, we might be onto something here. So, you know, basically what I told his folks was, after this, you know, if he decides to run, I have some Iowa experience, I'm in. Just let me know what I need to do, I'm in. And then that's how I got started, because I think we all, at least in America, hope for a better day and a better politics. And then Senator offered that, and I'll talk a little bit about how I think he's delivered on that. I'm going to go through the agenda real quick here. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2008, talk about both Obama for America and then the transition to organizing for America, talk a little bit about data and resource allocation and goal setting and why that's so important, and then finally, how do you build an organization to achieve those goals? Before we get started with 2008, though, I think it is important to talk a little bit about the primary in 2007 and why that was both important from an organization standpoint, but then also, frankly, important from a success standpoint, if that makes sense.